Well, welcome to the third installment of the whiskey series. We'll be talking about Knob Creek's aged 9 years Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And the subject matters will be, we'll call this good whiskey and bad logic, or if you prefer, science and Kool-Aid. Okay, so Knob Creek's Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, it's a small batch whiskey, which means it's been sampled from a number of different of the barrels. It's been aged 9 years. It's from the folks at Jim Beam. It is 50% alcohol by volume, or 100 proof, which is probably right where whiskey should be. Initially, you get the burnt sugar and the maple syrup when you smell the whiskey in the nose. It's joined by dark fruits and raisin. I was told to expect flint, but I don't smell that. But definitely oak. You pick up the oak and the aroma of this whiskey. It does hit with some heat. It's not harsh, doesn't make you gag. There's definitely some heat there. I was told to expect oak, and that's clearly present. There is pepper, which is not surprising with the heat. Much like the nose, the small batch starts out with that sweet maple syrup and definitely a catch of the bitter char and spice. That spice takes over initially with cinnamon, but for me the dry oak was throughout and to the finish. So, on silence and Kool-Aid drinkers, my issues with the shooting world. Yeah, I have issues. This should surprise no one. My biggest issues are that as a whole, the shooting world woefully lacks scientific truth or validation, and we're too heavily influenced by artistic argument and not enough critical thought. Simply, we have an overabundance of Kool-Aid drinkers. First, we have the instructors who believe their own poop don't stink and drink their own Kool-Aid. Then we have the students who swing from their coattails. There is a proper process to determine if X influences Y, if Q is heavier than R, and if A accomplishes a task better than B. This way is called the scientific method, and it starts with a hypothesis. The hypothesis is basically an opinion or belief. An example hypothesis might be, Weaver is a better stance than isosceles. It shows up frequently on gun boards, and it's a completely stupid troll for an argument from simple-minded shooters and instructors, but every self-appointed gun expert on the board will weigh in with their opinion. As a hypothesis, it would be rejected since better is too broad of a term. How is Weaver supposed to be better? Someone says it allows for faster first shots, another says it allows for a greater range of motion, a third says it is better for faster follow-on or shots or recoil control. Finally, someone says it's superior for accuracy. To support their opinion on motion, one party shows himself twisting left and right with both stances and claims a greater range of motion than one with the other. See, this is not science. The party is biased, and a sample size of one does not prove anything. An acceptable hypothesis is stated like, persons can shoot more accurately with Weaver than with isosceles stance. Great. Now we must identify a null hypothesis. See, we can never prove something true, but we can show that something is untrue. A single instance of something being true proves nothing, but a single instance of proving something to be untrue proves it to be untrue. The null hypothesis would be that persons shoot better using isosceles stance. We then conduct tests to determine with which stance persons shoot more accurately. There's a methodology to this. We must take a large population of randomly chosen persons. We assign them the groups, one to shoot Weaver, one to shoot isosceles. Maybe we include a control group. It is reasonable to have a standard set of instruction on how to shoot, which is independent from the stance. And ultimately, two groups shoot and measure the overall accuracy scores. These scores are subjected to statistical analysis to determine if this difference is significant so that we can answer the question, do the person shooting with the isosceles outshoot the person with a Weaver? If they did, the null hypothesis was proven, and the hypothesis that Weaver allows a person to shoot more accurately is disproven. If you do not follow the proceeding, and you still weigh in with your opinion that one stance is superior than the other, then you're part of the problem. As far as I know, no such test has ever been conducted, and therefore to prove your opinion, you must engage in artistic argument for why one stance is better than the other. It is not evidence that shooter Chinkachunk uses Weaver or that shooter Snaggleblart uses isosceles. It's no wonder that intelligent anti-gunners think gun people are a group of uneducated goofballs after reading just one thread on gun forums. Since all we have are opinions and artistic argument, we quickly give up critical thought. This leads us to be willing to believe a guy with a political science degree when he makes a firm declarative statement that the placing of magazine in the holders with the bullets facing away from the belt buckle is more biometrically correct than when the bullets are facing the belt buckle. He okey-doked you by making a statement you can't disprove because you don't understand the scientific method either. But he sounds so very certain and authoritative. Lacking critical thought, you accept the statement and it infects the shooting world. Lacking critical thought, we accept the argument that it is okay to slap the trigger to induce a shot because one of the world's best shooters, Robbie Latham, admits he slaps the trigger. Someone quotes Latham, and a whole group of new shooters are misled into thinking they can also slap the trigger and it won't adversely affect their shooting. Lacking critical thought, no one asks, is one shooter's method really best for the masses or even for me? Maybe that should be tested scientifically. More critical thought might lead you to ask, is Latham shooting a stock trigger? Hint, he's almost certainly not. It might only be a 1.5 pound trigger with almost zero take-up and over-travel. And finally, when Latham says he slaps it, does he really mean he slaps it the way we think slap? A critical thinker begins to understand that Latham's statement does not actually advocate slapping the trigger like a pimp taking the back of his hand to a disrespectful whore. Lacking critical thinking coupled with strong dynamic personalities leads to Kool-Aid drinkers. That I use critical and dynamic in the same sentence is a hint for you. Having paid money for the class, bought a ton of ammo, traveled, bought food, and rented a room, you're psychologically predisposed to defend what you've just learned, no matter how silly some of it may be. As evidence of the validity of what you were taught, you report your shooting improved. Well, Sparky, you did just practice with thousands of rounds, and you probably heard one or two truths in the whole of the instruction. It's just that outside those two gems, the rest was fluff. But my shooting improved, therefore what he said about grip must be right. My shooting improved, therefore what he said about stance must be true. No, you managed to improve through the practice of other more important skills. He might have taught you things that actually hindered your shooting or were meaningless, but you paid the money and the instructor is charismatic and you found improvement, so you believe the meaningless fluff is a gift from the shooting gods. Or worse, you believe that something actually detrimental to your progress is not. These people are dangerous. They will vigorously and viciously defend the instructor. It's a defensive mechanism. If you show the student that the guy they just paid thousands of dollars to for a 3-day pistol class is wrong, they feel like a dope, and no one wants to admit they were snookered, duped, and played. No one wants to face that they just paid all the money and invested that travel room board to learn from someone who was wrong. If we had critical thinking, we could spot the instructors who drink their own Kool-Aid. The easiest of these instructors to spot are the ones who teach the most ridiculous things. When they're subtler, it's much harder. I stumbled upon one guy who advocates that if you're caught standing close to someone to touch them when they surprise draw a gun, you should give them a half-hearted smack on the head, drop to the ground, draw your gun, and shoot them with your legs sticking straight up in the air. Alright, I don't know about you, but the last thing I want to do when someone is already drawing a gun on me is to waste the time on a half-hearted slap to their noodle, attempt a slow draw, risk injury as I drop myself onto my back, and ultimately render myself immobile on the ground. He teaches this to law enforcement who are wearing protective vests. When you lay down on your back, you take the protective vest mostly out of the equation. The vest is certainly doing you a whole lot more good when you're upright. Would that instructor hear it from me that he was teaching a completely head-up-ass tactic? Nope, because he was a Marine. Okay, listen, thank you for your service. Your resume is very impressive, and you're still an idiot. That you are a former Marine doesn't change how short bus your technique really is. This particular person also unloads a real gun in his class and has someone pointed at his chest for instructional purposes. I can't make this stuff up. I asked him if he had a blue gun. Nope, was the response. I recommend maybe he invest in one. It's certainly cheaper than an emergency room visit or a lawsuit for that matter. Oddly, this was in a video on controlling the future. Here's a grand idea. If it's not a real gun, you can control the future and eliminate you will ever be wrong that is unloaded and get yourself shot. A critical thinker weighs the risk-reward and comes to the conclusion that a $50 blue gun beats the remotest risk of being shot accidentally because you were using a real gun in the training environment. A critical thinker doesn't accept on face value the statements about biometric function from a poli-science major. And we would all benefit from less hero worship, Kool-Aid drinking, and the public displays of ignorance when we presume our creative arguments actually make a point.